Welcome everyone to today's virtual class. I hope you're all having a wonderful snow day and having a lot of fun. And I say yashar koach to all of you who are taking the time out of your busy day today to join me in our virtual classroom, which is also my living room, for a little bit of Torah learning. I'd like to take some time today to review the sugya that we started just a couple of days ago, and perhaps we'll do a few more lines which we will review back in class when the snow finally goes away. But if you have your Gemara open in front of you, we're on Daf Chav Zayin Amud Beis, about 7 lines, exactly 7 lines down from the top of the page. I will also attach a printout that you can use at home if you don't have your Gemara with you, and this way everyone can access the text of the Gemara. But for those of you who do have the real Gemara with you, we are 7 lines down from the top of Chav Zayin Amud Beis. If you recall from last time, the Gemara was having a discussion about how do we really know that Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba was in fact a Talmid Chaver of Rav, a colleague or a student that had become a rabbi himself. This whole previous sugya was discussing the notion of davening mincha up until Plag HaMincha, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, and then davening Marav immediately afterwards. The Gemara told us about a story that Rav had davened early on Friday afternoon. It was not yet Shabbos yet. It was not really Shabbos. And yet Rav started Shabbos early by davening Mariv. The Gemara relates the whole story that he went to visit the house of his friend Geniva, and his student Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba accompanied him. In the process of that story, which the Gemara quoted in order to prove to us that Rav followed the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, that one can daven mincha until Plag HaMincha, and then may daven Mariv immediately afterwards, the Gemara mentioned that Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba was davening the Shmona Esrei behind Rav, and Rav waited for his Talmud before he took his 3 steps back. In the context of that discussion, the Gemara indicates that Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba was a student of Rav, and yet he davened behind him. And we know from a brisa that a student is not permitted to daven behind his Rebbe. It's considered to be disrespectful to make one's Rebbe wait for him before he takes his 3 steps back from the Shmona Esrei. The answer that the Gemara had given us was that Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba was different than a regular student, than a regular Talmud. He was a Talmid Chaver, and therefore he was permitted to daven behind Rav. Now that we had that whole conversation, the Gemara wants to prove whether Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba was in fact a Talmid Chaver of Rav. So in line number 7 from the top, the Gemara relates to us the following story. V'hainu dika'amar le Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba. This is what Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba had said l'Rav, to Rav. Apparently, there was a scenario once where Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba was traveling with Rav, and they had started Shabbos early, before Shabbos really began. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba then asked Rav, on line number 8, Mi badalt? Did you separate? Literally, badalt means to separate. Comes from the same shoresh as the word havdalah, lehavdil, to separate. The question that Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba was asking his Rebbe Rav was, did you stop doing melacha? If you start Shabbos early, before Shabbos really begins at sunset, do you have to stop performing melacha, or are you permitted to continue doing melacha? Amar le, Rav responded to Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba yes, badilna, I stopped doing melacha. And the point here, we'll stop for just a moment here, is that one may not do melacha anymore after he starts Shabbos early. We're going to see in a few minutes that this is a big question in the Gemara, whether that is true or not. But the reason that we quoted this story is because of the following. Velo amar mi badil mar. When Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba asked Rav, his Rebbe, whether he stopped performing melacha after he started Shabbos early, the Gemara did not include, or Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba did not include the title Mar, which means one's master or one's rabbi. That's a respectful way to refer to one's Rebbe. Since Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba did not include the title Mar when he said Mi Badil, did you stop doing melacha, it must be that he was a Talmid Chaver. If he was a regular Talmud, then certainly he would have phrased his question by saying Mi Badil Mar. Did the master or did Rebbe stop performing melacha? Since he simply said Mi Badil, it must be that he was a Talmid Chaver and not a regular Talmud. And now that the Gemara brings up this discussion about starting Shabbos early and the permissibility of continuing to do melacha, we now get into that discussion. May one perform melacha after starting Shabbos early, or is this prohibited? So the Gemara now asks, Umi Badil, did he really stop doing melacha? V'ha'amar Rabbi Avin. Rabbi Avin once said, Pa'am achas, one time, Hispalal Rebbe shel Shabbos be'erev Shabbos. Rebbe, otherwise known as Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, the rabbi who collected the teachings of all of the Tanaim, the teachings from the Torah Shebaal Peh, as we mentioned in the beginning of the school year, and he codified them and wrote them down in what we know as the Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, the 6 orders of the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, or simply referred to as Rebbe, or sometimes Rabbeinu HaKadosh. One time he started Shabbos early, and after he started Shabbos early, it says, Hispalal Rebbe shel Shabbos be'erev Shabbos, Rebbe David Mariv on Friday afternoon, before sunset. And afterwards, v'nichnas lemerchatz, he went to the merchatz. Merchatz is a bathhouse. V'yatza, and then he left the bathhouse. V'shana lan, and he taught us. The word v'shana means to teach. We find this word in the Kriyas Shema that we say at least twice a day. V'shinantam levanecha, you have to teach your children again and again until they understand the Torah. V'shana lan pirkin, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi taught us a perek. Literally, it means a perek. It means he gave a shiur. So he started Shabbos early. He then went to the bathhouse, to the merchatz, and then afterwards he came out and he gave us a shiur. V'adayin lo chashecha, and it was not yet dark outside. In other words, Shabbos had not yet begun for everyone else. Now, the assumption of the Gemara here is that going to the merchatz, going to the bathhouse, is something that is not permissible on Shabbos. Rashi comes along and actually explains to us that this was problematic. We're going to save this Rashi for a little bit later. Actually, we'll do the Rashi now. Lebeis HaMerchatz, Salka Da'atach, it occurred to him, it entered his mind, La'achar Shegazru al Hazeya V'al HaRechitza B'Shabbos. This Rashi actually will put on hold for now. This relates to a few lines from where we are at the moment. But the point is that the rabbis made a gzeira, they made a decree against going to the bathhouse on Shabbos. We explained in class earlier today that the reason for this was because the bath attendants, the people working in the bathhouse, would heat up the water on Shabbos, which is the melacha of bishul. One is not allowed to cook water or anything else on Shabbos, and in order to make sure that people would not accidentally come to heat up the water on Shabbos, or in order to discourage people from doing so, the rabbis made a gzera against bathing at all on Shabbos. Therefore, the fact that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi went to the bathhouse after he started Shabbos indicates that if one starts Shabbos early, before Shabbos really begins for everyone else, he is in fact allowed to continue doing melacha. And that's what the Gemara tries to prove, or that's what Rabbi Avin tries to prove from this story. Rava comes along, one of the greatest Amoraim, and he answers that this is not a good proof that one is allowed to do melacha if he starts Shabbos early, because Amar Rava, Hahu dinichnas lahazeya. The reason that Rebbe went into the bathhouse was not to take a bath, which is what the rabbis made asur, but rather lahazeya. He went to sweat, what we would call in modern times a sauna. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi went to the sauna, and it's believed It certainly was in the time of the Gemara, and even nowadays it's believed that going to the sauna is beneficial for one's health. It's a healthy thing to do, to sweat. V'kodem gzera hava. This was before the gzera against going to a sauna on Shabbos. So there are actually a few different gzeros, there are a few different decrees here. One is that the Chachamim, Chazal said one cannot take a bath on Shabbos, and furthermore, one cannot go to the sauna on Shabbos. But when Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi went to the sauna on Friday afternoon, after he started Shabbos early, that was actually before the time that the rabbis made this gezerah against going to the sauna on Shabbos. So this whole story, in fact, does not prove to us that one can do melacha if he started Shabbos early. Now the Gemara asks another question, trying to prove that perhaps one can do melacha if he started Shabbos early. The Gemara says, Eini. Eini is a very important Gemara word. It means, is that really so? Is that really true, that one may not do melacha if he starts Shabbos early? Vaha Abaye. But now we have another story. One time Abaye, who again was one of the greatest Amoraim along with Rava, Abaye shara le, he permitted, the word shara means to permit. Abaye shara le Rav Dimi bar Levi lechavure sale. One time Rav Dimi bar Levi started Shabbos early. And after he started Shabbos early, he then went to his Rebbe, Abaye, and he asked whether he can continue making wicker baskets. It would seem that Rav Dimi bar Levi was in the business of producing these baskets. Now, in order to produce the baskets, you have to take the material and you have to expose it to smoke. You would have to take a certain mineral called sulfur and burn the sulfur so that it makes sulfuric smoke, and by taking out the material of the basket and putting it in the smoke, it enables you to form the basket into the shape that you want it to be. That's called lichvure. So shara le, the Rav Dimi bar Levi, lichvure sale. Abaye shara le, permitted Rav Dimi bar Levi lichvure, to put into the smoke sale. Sal is a basket. That's why kadur sal is a basketball. So saleh in Aramaic means baskets. Abaye permitted Rav Dimi bar Levi to put his baskets into the smoke. So that would indicate that since Rav Dimi bar Levi started Shabbos early, and then Abaye allowed him to make a fire and put the basket into the fire and into the smoke rather, that would indicate that one is allowed to do melacha if he starts Shabbos early. That goes against what we just said a moment ago. So the Gemara now retracts, takes this back, and it says that actually this is not a good proof. Hahu ta'usa havai. This whole story with Rav Dimi bar Levi was a story where Rav Dimi bar Levi started Shabbos early by mistake. Rashi comes along, ta'usa havai. Rashi dibur hamaskel ta'usa havai. It was a mistake. Rashi says, lo kibel alav tosefes Shabbos mishas tefila mida'as. Rav Dimi bar Levi did not on purpose start Shabbos early. Ella yom ha'me'unan haya. Rather, yom ha'me'unan haya. It was a cloudy day. Ukesavar, and he thought, chashecha, that it was dark outside. Rav Dimi bar Levi thought that Shabbos had actually started. Va'achar kach zarcha chama, and afterwards the sun came out. So according to the explanation of Rashi, what actually happened in this story was Rav Dimi bar Levi started Shabbos early because he thought that Shabbos really began since it was a cloudy day outside. When the clouds dissipated and the sun came out, Rav Dimi bar Levi realized that it was not really Shabbos yet. He then went to his Rebbe Abaye and asked him whether it was permissible to continue working in order to produce his wicker baskets. Abaye then told him that it was permissible. So this whole story, the Gemara now says, is actually not a proof that one may do melacha if he starts Shabbos early, because in this story, the reason Rav Dimi bar Levi started Shabbos early was ta'usa, a ta'ut, it was a mistake. Now the Gemara asks a question. The ta'usa mihadra, but does one go back for a mistake? Does a mistake not count? V'ha'amara Avidan, one time Avidan told us, Pa'am achas, it happened once, niskashu shamayim ba'avim, the heavens, the sky became full of clouds on a Shabbos afternoon. Kisivurim ha'am lomar, the people thought to say, the word kisivurim is like the word sover. When we say a rabbi sover, he's of the opinion of, he thinks, whatever the Gemara says he thinks. It's the same shoresh. Kisivurim ha'am lomar, the people thought to say chashechahu, that it was dark outside. They thought that Shabbos had ended. V'nichnesu lebeis hakneses, they came to the shul. V'hispaldu shal motzai Shabbos b'Shabbos, they davened Mariv when it was still actually Shabbos. V'nispazru ha'avim, and then the clouds departed, the clouds went away. The word v'nispazru is the word lehitpazer, which means to separate. In Megillas Esther, if you recall, Haman Harasha tells Achashverosh, Yeshno am echad mefuzar umefurad. There is a nation that's mefuzar, that's scattered, that's separate. Here is the same word. V'nispazru means they, the clouds, went away. They dissipated. They became scattered. V'nispazru ha'avim, the clouds became scattered. V'zarcha ha'chama, and the sun came out. Uba'u, the people then came. V'shalu es Rebbe, they asked Rabbi Huda Hanasi, what is the halacha now? Do they have to daven Mariv a second time when Shabbos actually ends? Ve'amar, and he said, Rabbi Huda Hanasi said to them, Hoil v'hispallu, since you davened already, your davening counts. So in that case, where they did not have to daven Mariv a second time, by the way, I should mention, they were not allowed to do melacha until Shabbos actually ended. In the case that Avidan quotes for us, Shabbos actually ended, let's say, at 8 o'clock. And at 7 o'clock, it became very cloudy. The people thought that Shabbos was over, so they davened Mariv. And then at 7:30, let's say, the clouds went away and the sun came out. They realized Shabbos was not actually over. For that last half an hour, they were not allowed to do melacha. But when Shabbos actually ended, they didn't have to daven a second time. So the Gemara now assumes, or Avidan, who's quoted in the Gemara, assumes that since they didn't have to daven a second time, we see that their davening did actually count for something. So maybe in our case also, since Rav Dimi Bar Levi davened Mariv of Shabbos on Friday, even though he did it b'ta'us, by mistake, nevertheless, since he davened, the fact that he davened should be enough to make it like Shabbos for him, even though it was under mistaken pretenses. So the Gemara says, Sha'ani tzibor, a tzibor, a group of people, is Sha'ani, Shin Aleph Nun Yud, is different. Delo matrichinan lehu. We don't make them go back. We don't make things difficult for a tzibor, for a group of people, but for an individual, seemingly, we do. So I know some of this Gemara might sound a little bit confusing the first time that we go through it. Let's quickly recap what we learned today. First of all, the Gemara tried to prove to us for sure that Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba was a Talmid Chaver of Rav and not simply a Talmid. We proved that by quoting a story in which Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba asked his Rabbi Rav whether he stopped doing melacha on Friday afternoon when he started Shabbos early. The way he asked Rav was mi badil instead of mi badil mar. Since he left out the word mar, the title used for a rabbi, it must be he was a Talmid Chaver and not a regular Talmid. Then the Gemara asked the question, is it really true that one is not allowed to do melacha if he starts Shabbos early before Shabbos really begins? In order to prove that this is not true, the Gemara quotes a story to us. The story that the Gemara quotes is with Rebbe Yehuda Hanasi, who apparently started Shabbos early on a Friday afternoon before Shabbos really began. He then went to the merchatz, to the bathhouse, and came out and gave a shiur. The Gemara answers that's not a good proof, because when Rebbe Yehuda Hanasi went to the bathhouse, he didn't go to take a bath. which is prohibited by Chazal because of a concern that one might come to heat up the water on Shabbos, but rather he went lahazeya, to sweat. He went for the sake of going to the sauna. And kodem hagzera hava, it was before the gzera, it was before the rabbis made a decree against going to the sauna on Shabbos as well. So the story with Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, in fact, does not prove to us that one is not allowed to do that. It does not prove to us that one can do melacha if he starts Shabbos early. We're back to square one, which is the assumption that one may not do melacha if he starts Shabbos early. The Gemara then quotes a second story for us, the story of Rav Dimi bar Levi, who started Shabbos early, and then he asked his Rebbe if he's permitted to continue working on making his wicker baskets, which requires making a fire and putting the basket in the smoke of the fire, and his Rebbe told him that he was allowed to do this. The Gemara seems to say that this is a proof that you can do melacha if you start Shabbos early. And then the Gemara says that's actually not a good proof, because that was a case of ta'usa hava, it was a mistake. Rav Dimi bar Levi started Shabbos early because it was very cloudy. He thought Shabbos was actually beginning, and therefore he davened Mariv. When the clouds went away and he realized that Shabbos had not actually begun, he then went to his Rebbe and asked his Rebbe whether or not he can continue working on his baskets. And the Rebbe told him that he could, because this was done in his acceptance of Shabbos. His Kabbalah's Shabbos was b'ta'us, it was done mistakenly. The Gemara then asks about if this is true, that a mistaken acceptance of Shabbos doesn't count. One time there was a group of people that on Shabbos afternoon saw that the sky became very dark. Apparently it was also a cloudy day. They assumed that Shabbos was over. They went to shul, they davened Mariv, and then when the clouds dispersed and they realized that Shabbos was not yet actually over, they came to Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi and they asked him whether they would have to daven Mariv a second time when Shabbos actually ends. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi told them that they do not have to daven Mariv a second time. Of course, they can't do melacha until Shabbos is over, but they don't have to daven Mariv a second time. So since their davening counted, the Gemara says maybe it's possible that the davening of Rav Dimi bar Levi should count, and even though he davened Mariv because he mistakenly thought that it was actually Shabbos, nevertheless, the fact that the davening of the people in the story that Avidan told us counted, maybe Rav Dimi bar Levi's davening should count as well, and therefore it should be considered like Shabbos for him, even though it was b'ta'us, even though it was a mistake. And the Gemara answers, no, shani tzibor, the tzibor is different, lo delo metarchinan lehu, because we don't make a tzibor go back. So the outcome of this Gemara is actually recorded in the Shulchan Aruch, in Siman Reish Samech Gimel in Hilchos Shabbos. The Shulchan Aruch tells us as follows: Im biyom hameunan ta'ut tzibor, if on a cloudy day the congregation makes a mistake, v'chashvu shechashecha, they thought that it was they thought it was dark, they thought that Shabbos actually was about to begin. V'hiliku neros, they lit the Shabbos candles on Friday afternoon, even though it was not yet really Shabbos, but they thought that it was. V'hispalalu tfilas arvis, they daven mariv shel Shabbos. V'achar kach nispazru ha'avim, and afterwards the clouds went away. V'zarcha chama, and the sun came out. Einam tzrichim lachazor ulhispalal arvis, they don't need to go back and daven again when Shabbos actually begins. Im kishehispalu hayam miplag hamincha ulamala, as long as they daven mariv after plag hamincha, which is the earliest possible time that you could daven mariv, then they don't have to daven mariv a second time. Of course, if they daven mariv before plag hamincha, then their mariv doesn't count, because they daven before the earliest possible time. V'im yachidhu, and if this was a single individual who daven mariv after plag hamincha, but he davened mariv mistakenly because he thought that Shabbos was about to begin when in fact it wasn't, v'im yachidhu sheta bekach, tzarichu lachazor ulhispal tfilas arvis, he as an individual needs to go back and daven mariv a second time, because as the Gemara had told us, shane tzibor, a tzibor is different, delo metarchinan lehu, because we don't make a tzibur go back and make the extra effort to daven a second time, but a yachid, an individual, we do make go back. Ule'inyan asiyas melacha, regarding the issue of doing melacha, bein tzibur, bein yachid mutarim, both an individual and the tzibur are allowed to do melacha if they start Shabbos early by accident. The Kabbalah Shabbos haisa b'ta'us, because they started Shabbos early accidentally. The Shulchan Aruch then continues with a related topic, but it's not exactly our topic. So, I'll just say one more line here. V'yeshomrim, there are those who say she'osam shehidliku neros asurim ba'asiyas melacha usharin shehabayis mutarin. There are those who say that the ones who light the candles, they cannot do melacha, but everyone else who did not yet start Shabbos is allowed to do melacha. That's not really our topic, so we'll stop the Shulchan Aruch at that point. But the bottom line of the Gemara and the bottom line of the Shulchan Aruch is that a person who starts Shabbos early by accident, his Kabbalah Shabbos does not actually count. However, if a person started Shabbos early b'kavana, on purpose, and he knew that it wasn't actually Shabbos yet for everyone, but he wanted to start Shabbos early. Once he's Mekabel Shabbos, once he or she starts Shabbos, then he may not do melacha anymore. It's considered to be like Shabbos for him. However, a person who starts Shabbos early b'ta'us, by mistake, that Kabbalah Shabbos that was done mistakenly actually does not count. And that's why Rav Dimi Bar Levi was allowed to continue working on his baskets. But ordinarily, if a person does start Shabbos early, as long as it was on purpose, then the Kabbalah Shabbos counts and they're not allowed to do melacha. Thank you for joining me for this short mini shiur. I'm glad that we were able to learn today even though there was no school. And once again, I say yasher koach to all of you for your participation. I will post or email to the parents a few review questions, and if you answer the review questions based on this virtual shiur, there will be an extra credit given. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your snow day, or maybe snow days, depending on whether there'll be school tomorrow. And please make sure that when you're outside, everyone is safe, and I wish you guys all the best. Take care.